First, let me thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts with you. And I must state in advance that I'll not talk about myself at all. It is very difficult to ask one to talk about oneself. But I'll share my thoughts with you as a Kenyan and as an African. I want to preface my conversation with you out of a book that I first read in 1979. I've not read the book since, but I remember the book very well. This is a book written by one of the great Greek writers, Sophocles. It contains 3 books or 3 plays, which are very famous and which I believe you should know. And if you do not know them, I believe that you will find out where they are and read them this evening. The 3 plays are Antigone, Oedipus at Colonus, and Oedipus. I have faith that you have read those famous plays written long before the birth of Christ. And I want to preface, as I said, what I want to say with a conversation that takes place in the book of Oedipus. Oedipus is a Greek legend, and it is recorded in that book that it was prophesied by the oracle of Apollo that Oedipus would kill his father and marry his mother. And when he was born, the parents threw him into the wilderness that the prophecy may not come to pass. Unknown to them, the little boy was picked up by somebody and brought up, and in his adulthood he heard about the story, and he tried to run away from home. And as he was running away, he met an old man and killed the old man. Little did he know that that was his father. Of course, the story then says that he went into the kingdom of Thebes and he saved the city by solving a riddle. And the prize was that he was allowed to marry the dead king's wife. Little did he know that the dead king's wife was his mother, Jocasta, his father having been King Liars. Then tragedy started striking in Thebes. People were dying, bad things were happening, and he himself decreed that whoever found out what killed the king would be exiled from the land. And of course, one of the seers of Apollo said that he was the one who had committed the crime, and he was exiled. And what I wanted to speak about is to be found in the last portion of that play, when Oedipus has been removed out of his city, he's been exiled, and as he goes out, the commoners who are commentating on the play says, "Behold, sons and daughters of Thebes." This was Oedipus, the greatest of all men. He was envied by all men. Behold, what a tide of misfortune swept over his head. Then learn that mortal man must always look to his ending, and none can be called happy until the day that he dies and carries his happiness to the grave in peace. Why did I want to cite that? That is equally true that none can be called successful until the day that he or she dies and carries his success to the grave in peace. As long as we are alive, Any claim that we are successful is not only arrogant but misguided. For the moment, what we appear to be doing is that we are on the right path. And what you should do is to pray that we should continue to be on that path. History has demonstrated times without number that men whom we thought to be successful betray you at the 11th hour. And therefore, ours is to be humble. I'm still with you in Greece. In those days of Sophocles, there also lived a great man, Socrates, of whom you know much. It is recorded that the oracle of Apollo wanted to determine who was the wisest man in Greece. And he sent out one of his oracles to go out in Greece and determine who was the wisest. In those days, Greece was known for many great things. The great writers of the time. If it was not Sophocles, it was Aristophanes. If it was not Aristophanes, it was Socrates or somebody else. When the oracle went out, the oracle came back and said that the wisest man in Greece was Socrates. And the only reason why the oracle arrived at that conclusion was when Socrates was asked, "What do you know?" He said, "The only thing that I know is that I know nothing." It is his humility that set him apart as the wisest man in Greece. So I too come here by saying the only thing that I know is that I know nothing. But progressively and consistently, I try to understand my environment. And this started very early on when I was a student. Nowadays I see students of Nairobi University. I was in 1984 and 1985 the chairman of the Students' Organization of Nairobi University. And when I campaigned to be the student, I did not spend a single cent. Today, I hear that students spend 10 million and I wonder why. In other words, I'm trying to say that there is an ethic which is perverted, which now controls not only our country but our people. Last year, I was in Dar es Salaam. I was invited to Dar es Salaam to help some of my colleagues there with the constitution which will be subjected to referendum in Tanzania next month, hopefully. And as I was traveling at the Julius Kambarage Nyerere International Airport in Dar es Salaam on my way back to Kenya, I had my bag. I had liquid in my bag. I wanted to check it in, to carry it on rather. But they told me I had to check it in, it was not padlocked. I went to a young man who was selling padlocks. And I told him I wanted a padlock, and he asked me in Kiswahili, "Unaenda wapi huko?" And I said, naelekea jijini Nairobi. Asema, wa Kenya, wezi hao, nunua kufuli mbili. That tells you the image of Kenyans that is out there. Several years ago, I was in Zanzibar, and a Tanzanian minister in his unguarded moment was speaking, and he said, hili swala la Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki ni swala nzuri sana. Kwanza, itapanua soko, itawawezesha wana wa Afrika Mashariki kusafiri, lakini kitu kinachotuogopesha ni wa Kenya. Kwanza kabisa, hawana nidhamu. Siasa zao ni duni na za kikabila. Tuna hofu ya kwamba wakiingia katika Afrika Mashariki watatuambukiza ukabila. Jambo la pili ni walafi. na wanapenda sana ardhi, tayari wanaimezea mate ardhi yetu. You may not, and in fact you are not supposed to like what I'm telling you, but I'm trying to tell you that that is the image that we have out there. On our side, what image do we have of Tanzanians? Lazy and polite. Polite. Equally of Tanzanians or Ugandans. But the question is, we claim to be a Christian country, 80% Christians. But whenever I go to church on Sunday, when the congregation is invited to take the Holy Communion, and their reverends here, they tell the congregation, we are in the house of God. But ladies, carry your bags, because there are people who may steal. Even in church, we steal. I said at one time in Mombasa that we live in a country where we profess the blood of Christ, but in truth the blood of ethnicity is thicker than the blood of Christ. Because when the chips are down, it is our ethnicity that counts, not our Christianness. You young men, when you are communicating via Twitter, via Facebook and other media, the venom that you spew out in the name of ethnicity is appalling and worrying. The question is, who are your role models? Today, there is a culture in this country which I call the Sonkonization culture. The youth have been Sonkonized, and I'm creating this word deliberately. What is Sonkonization? Sonkonization is the process of acquisition of material wealth by means that are unknown and unfathomable. And once it has been so acquired, is to distribute that wealth with abject abandon in order to entice the people whose only desire is to acquire wealth by whatever means. The African woman was suffering. The African woman who thought that they would now get water in a tap in their home was still running 5 kilometers away to get water. Meanwhile, our monster leaders were laundering their clothes in France and in Paris. The African woman who thought that they would go to Kariakoo market here in Dar es Salaam or Owino market in Kampala, Uganda, and get all the goodies could not get them, because meanwhile the Minister for Agriculture had agreed that bad seed be supplied, and meanwhile we were getting mangoes from Europe. The African woman who thought that they could have food on the table could not have food on the table. We had killed all our sugar industries that we may have sugar from Brazil and Mexico. And the African youth was no different. The African youth who thought that upon realization of independence there would be occasion for them to get employment was now being humiliated at the embassies of the United States of America as he struggled to get the almighty green card. The young African who thought that liberation would bring something new was now struggling at the United Kingdom embassy, filling a document that is 50 pages long, being asked who their great-great-grandfathers were and what enterprise they were engaged in. And they could not stop there. They went to the Australian embassy and to the French embassy, and the treatment was the same. The African youth was being treated like a leper, like a pariah, like a subhuman being. And they were asking, for what purpose did we gain this thing called independence? And those who are not humiliated in Gambia, in Nigeria, in Niger,
were crossing the Red Sea, swimming across the Mediterranean to go to Italy so that they may be enslaved anew. Meanwhile, the African leader was busy looting from their countries and buying mansions in Paris and in London and in Florida, and driving private jets and helicopters and being addressed as their excellencies and honourables instead of being addressed properly as horribles. Hygiene had disappeared in African politics. And what had started happening is that a new generation of African leaders who were dissatisfied started emerging. And one need only look at Africa in the 1980s when we begin to see the emergence of a new crop of leaders who are saying, this is not what we fought for. And I can remember so very vividly Ethiopia's Meles Zenawi in 1984 abandoning his medical studies and pursuing the Deg regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, and he removed Haile Mariam. And there is a sense in which some hygiene has been reintroduced in Ethiopia. And I can remember here, God works in strange ways. Idi Amin made the mortal mistake of assuming that Tanzania and Mwalimu Julius Nyerere could be poked without consequence. He tried, and he died regretting it. And this became, indeed, many of you will remember that this University of Dar es Salaam became the finishing school of latter-day revolutionaries. John Garang di Mabior was here. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni was here. If they were not students, they passed through here because this was the mecca of political revolutionaries. Eduardo Mondlane was here. Samora Machel passed through here, if only for a few hours. Nelson Holisa Mandela passed through here. Sam Nujoma came through here. This was the baptism ground. And the high priest was Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. It was he who, in a manner of speaking, said, with this water I thee baptize, that you may go out there and change your country. And Yoweri Kaguta Museveni went out into Uganda, and there is a sense, whether you like it or not, in which some hygiene was introduced in that country. There is a sense in which when Samora Moises Machel left this ground, he went to Mozambique, and there was a sense in which some hygiene was introduced in that country. There is a sense in which John Garang di Mabior left here, and some hygiene was beginning to be introduced in South Sudan. Right now, the story is a little different, but one can see that there was this new crop of leaders who recognized that indeed we had to do something about it. But ladies and gentlemen, what had happened over the years? Let us ask ourselves the fate of Africa. Why I say that there is a need for political hygiene. Africa today has 54 odd countries. And allow me to take you through a tour of Africa, if the moderator will be gracious enough to give me latitude. When you start from the Cape in South Africa, there is a great country which has given birth to great men. 1912, the first political party to be founded in Africa, the African National Congress of Sir Albert Lutuli. That party has given birth to the Mandelas, to the Governing Mbekis, to the Reginald Oliver Tambo. There was great pain during the apartheid regime, but wisdom prevailed upon President de Klerk. And in 1994, we created what was called a rainbow nation. Mandela had his honeymoon. Then came Governor Mbeki, or Thabo Mbeki, the son of Governor Mbeki. Then came Jacob Zuma. I do not know where Jacob is taking South Africa. But from where I am, there is need for hygiene in South Africa. Because that is a great country. And that is the anchor of Southern Africa. Nelson Mandela left a country that was called the Rainbow Nation. Today I'm beginning to hear them talk about the Zulu and the Xhosa and the Pedi. It is your own Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere who says, katika karne ya 21 mnasema tupande basi la makabila, hiyo ni ujinga na upumbavu. Then there is another country, because there is need for hygiene in African politics. And when one talks about hygiene, one wants to see improved agriculture. One wants to see improved infrastructure. One wants to see improved education. One wants to see that the quality of the life of our women and children is improved. And you go to Namibia, there is a sense in which there is some hygiene there. If only the land question could be solved, that would be a country that is worthy, is moving in the right direction. One can begin to see that. Then you move to Angola, that unfortunate land of Agostinho Neto, and you will remember Holden Roberto and Jonas Malheiro Savimbi. There is a sense in which that country was traumatized. I'm happy to note that President Dos Santos now says he's going to retire in 2018. My only concern is that he is sick now, and he is seeking treatment in Madrid, Spain. Why don't they have a good hospital in Luanda, Angola? After you've been a president for 20 years, you are going to another civilization to treat you. There is a sense in which there was lack of hygiene. Then you go to Botswana, that great country. In 1966, Botswana was a backwater country with nothing but courtesy of an individual who knew that hygiene depended and required that you improve the quality of people's lives. Sir Seretse Khama. And you know, when you have hygiene, even the politics becomes hygienic. And you realize that politics is not a life and death issue. That politics is a question of the competition of ideas. I've just read a Tanzanian newspaper here which I thought was very insightful. Siasa ni kupambanisha hoja sio vioja. And there is beauty in that. And Nyerere put it even better in much more eloquent Kiswahili than I can master. He said, kwanza tutambue ya kwamba ikulu ni mahali patakatifu. But I'm still talking about Botswana, Seretse Khama, Ketumile Masire, Festus Mohai, and Ian Khama. They now know that politics is not life and death. That is a country where there is hygiene. For those who are Afro-pessimists, who think that nothing is happening in Africa, something is happening. They are monsters, but they are also angels. But did they not exist like that even in the heavens? Lucifer alongside Michael and Gabriel? It would appear that as it is in heaven, so it is on earth. And if you go to Mozambique, you can also begin to see that there is a problem there, but there is an attempt at hygiene. You go to Zambia, that is another country, Kenneth David Kaunda. On the day that he left office, Kenneth David Kaunda had only $8,000 in his account. If you ask your typical African Tanzanian councillor today, before Magufuli came in, that was pocket change. After 24 years in power, $8,000 only. Those are people who love their country and sacrifice. There is a need for hygiene in Zambia. It is the only country in the world that I know where when an opposition leader blocks a motorcade, it does not become the offense of obstruction, it becomes the offense of treason. Unprecedented in the world. Hygiene is necessary in that country. And I look forward to hygiene being introduced. Then one comes to Tanzania. You know, Tanzania, when one talks about hygiene, one must start in the 1960s. One must remember the Arusha Declaration and the nobility of the intentions of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And that is why many of you may not know, but at one time it was suggested that he be made a saint of the Catholic Church. And the reason was very simple. This was a man who had ideas. This was a man who had clarity of thought. This was a man who could see the future almost with the exactitude of a Jewish prophet. This was a man who had the humility, almost like the humility of the carpenter of Nazareth. This was a man who loved his country. He made mistakes, and when he made them, he realized and corrected them. That is his greatness. Is it not Saint Just who said that nobody can rule guiltlessly? This is a man who found 120 plus ethnic groups and welded them into one nation, so that Tanzanians speak with one voice. You know, if you look at Tanzania and you ask your typical Tanzanian, what was the ethnic extraction of President Kambarage Nyerere? They do not know and they do not care. If you ask Tanzanians what was the ethnic extraction of the second president of Tanzania, Mzee Ali Hassan Mwinyi, the Tanzanians do not know and they do not care because it does not matter. If you ask them what was the ethnic extraction of the third president of Tanzania, Benjamin William Mkapa, they do not know and it does not matter and they do not care. And if you ask Tanzania what was the ethnic extraction of your fourth president, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, they do not know and they do not care. And if you ask them what is the extraction of your fifth president, John Pombe Magufuli, they do not know and they do not care. They only know that he's a bulldozer. But you go to my country, Kenya, God save my country. God save my country. When you meet your typical Kenyan and you introduce yourself as John, they'll ask for the second name, not that they may know your full names, but that they may identify you with your ethnicity and pigeonhole you accordingly. When you go into that country, which is a great country in prospect, but which is being destroyed by negative ethnicity, you ask them who the first president of Kenya was, they'll tell you it was Jomo Kenyatta and he was Kikuyu, and we care. We want our Kikuyu president. And if you ask them who was the second president, they'll tell you it was Daniel Arap Moi of the Kalenjin extraction, and we cared because it was our turn to eat. And if you ask them who was the third president, they'll tell you it is Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, and he is a Kikuyu, and we want him to continue because we Kikuyus and we Kalenjin only feel safe when one of our own is in State House. And if you ask the opposition and you ask the leaders from my own ethnic group, the Luo of Kenya, the Luo will tell you we have been marginalized for too long. The time has come that God must smile upon us and our son must be the president. And if you ask the Luhyas, they'll say the same thing. That is the tragedy of gigantic proportions. I'm submitting to us that the country called Kenya needs political hygiene. I'm submitting to us that the country called Kenya needs to come to Tanzania here on a benchmarking tour, and that the President of the Republic of Kenya and all our parliamentarians should sit at the State House and be lectured by John Pombe Magufuli on the finer points of governance. Of course, Mzee Warioba will be there, and other stalwarts will be there. Salim Ahmed Salim will be there. Great Tanzanians will be there. And Nyerere will remind us, katika karne ya 21 tupande basi ya makabila ujinga na upumbavu, because it can destroy a nation. There is need for political hygiene in Kenya. Right now in Nigeria, the Igbos want to secede, and they are being warned by the Yorubas and the Northerners. There is need for political hygiene. But let me also say one of the things that relates to hygiene. Aside from negative ethnicity, there is another thing that has killed Africa and taken away political hygiene: corruption. You know, it would appear that we of the Negroid blood relate very poorly with this thing called money. Money is a useful facility that enables you to do things with ease. But if you allow money to control you and you begin to adore money and you acquire appetite for money, then you are in trouble. And I want to submit to us that Africa is the only continent in the world where upon appointment into political office or upon ascending to the political office, it's as if you have won a lottery ticket to sudden wealth. In Africa, when you are appointed a minister, even the newspapers will say, if you are appointed to the Ministry of Finance, he's been appointed to the lucrative Ministry of Finance. If you are appointed to the Ministry of Agriculture or Mining, they say you've been appointed to the lucrative Ministry of Mining. But when you are appointed to the Minister of Culture, they say you've been appointed to the lean Ministry of Culture. In other words, there is a sense in which institutions in Africa appear to believe that he who gets into public office has a license to be a thief. And if you look at many African countries, many African leaders cannot account for their wealth. They have stripped their countries naked. You know, when I look at some of the great leaders of Africa, some who will not be remembered so very fondly by history, I regret. Robert Gabriel Mugabe of Zimbabwe. Nyinyi Waswahili mnasema wali wa kushiba huonekana kwenye sinia. In 1980s, when Mugabe took power, it was said of him that he had the largest number of degrees of any leader in the world, and he had degrees. It was said that he was a passionate revolutionary, and he was a passionate revolutionary. It was said that he had liberated Rhodesia, renamed Zimbabwe into a great country, and for the first 10 years he did a good job. Then something happened. Different commentators have different ways of saying. Some of them say that Sally died and he married Grace, and it has never been the same again. I do not know. Some of them said that he became a prisoner of some of his comrades. I do not know. But the only thing that I know is that all the historical dividends he had accumulated have now been squandered. Why? They have been squandered because Robert Gabriel Mugabe now presides over a country where there is 90% unemployment. Robert Gabriel Mugabe now presides over a country which does not have a currency but has a central bank. This is unprecedented in the history of modern civilization. I'm submitting to us that corruption has been at the very heart of the destruction of Africa. That is why we do not have roads. That is why we do not have good hospitals. That is why we cannot feed ourselves in Kenya today. We and Ethiopia, we are importing maize from Mexico. In Liberia, they're importing chicken from Brazil. And in many countries, we cannot even feed ourselves. We do not make our own medicine. Medicine is made as generics in India. We do not even produce our own seeds to plant our fields. They are being made by Syngenta and Monsanto. We do not produce anything because of corruption. But there is a sense in which one can begin to see some hygiene. There is a sense when I arrived here in Dar es Salaam, and I look at the newspapers and I see a white gentleman having flown into Tanzania in a private jet from the company called Acacia, goes into State House in Dar es Salaam and literally almost saying, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Nimekosa sana, nimekosa sana, nimekosa sana. And President John Pombe Magufuli, as if he was a Catholic father, saying, nimekusikia mwanangu, nimekusikia mwanangu. Tutakuhurumia lakini kwa masharti. Na masharti ni ya kwamba lazima ulipe ulizozipora. I felt told that there is an African leader who can stand up to international pirates who for 20 years have deprived Tanzania of taxes that would have gone to schools, taxes that would have gone to the health sector, taxes that would have gone to infrastructure, taxes that would have gone into agriculture. John Pombe Magufuli is a breath of fresh air. I know that there are some Tanzanians who may think that he's disrupting their agenda. John Pombe Magufuli disrupt their agenda. For if you come into a country and you find a patient suffering from cancer, you've got to subject them to chemotherapy. And when you administer chemotherapy, the hair will fall out a little. There will be some pain. That pain is necessary because there is no gain without pain. I'm not a Jewish prophet nor related to one. I'm not a member of CCM. But if John Pombe Magufuli continues on this trajectory and has a second term, in the next 10 years, Tanzania will be one of the largest economies in this country. God save John Pombe Magufuli. You know, I was reading a tweet and some American is saying, bring us John Pombe Magufuli. And I was in Kenya and I said at one time that we need to Magulify Kenya. In other words, there is a sense in which a new English word can be found, the Magufulification of Africa. In fact, I dare say that even my own paper, instead of calling it a call for hygiene in African politics, I would say the Magufulification of Africa. And I would still be right. But the whites say that one swallow does not make a summer. There are other good examples in Africa of the beginning of the introduction of political hygiene. Ian Khama in Botswana. Ian Khama in Botswana, it is said that a minister in his government went to him and said, "I've been named in a scandal, Your Excellency, help me." He told him, "There is nothing that I can do." The individual went to his rural home. The following day, it is reported that he had committed suicide. I'm not a sadist, nor do I intend to be one, but if there are such individuals, I want more suicides. Ian Khama is yet another breath of fresh air. Paul Kagame of Rwanda, 1994, the United Nations turned away the Rwandese within 100 days. Anything between 800,000 and 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus were killed even in churches. Then there came a tall, lanky man, Paul Kagame, and his comrades in arms. I was there 2 days ago, and one of the best drives out of any airport in the world is to be found in Kigali, in Rwanda. And you can see, so that those who thought that Africans cannot do it, our color is innocent. The Negroid, the dark color is innocent. It is not in our DNA. No. What happens is that there are some within our ranks who are errant, who must be punished. One can go on and on, but even my own good friend Yoweri Kaguta Museveni found a dilapidated Uganda. And even if you say that Yoweri has now stayed a little longer, there is a sense in which history will remember him fondly. One can go on and on, but one must also remember that lunch must be served. And if one remembers that lunch must be served, one must also remember that there is the law of diminishing returns. And one must also remember that one must now grow to their conclusion, even as they are talking about a call for political hygiene. So I'm submitting to us this morning that Africa can be great and Africa must be great. But Africa will only be great if we Africans do that which is good and right. The great Indian nationalist Chakravarti Rajagopalachari said that when politics stumbles, the country pays. So the first thing that we must do is to introduce hygiene in our politics. And now that I'm in Tanzania, the first thing that we must do is to magulify our politics. I know that there is a Kiswahili saying, mgema kisifiwa tembo litia maji, and I'm conscious that one of the names of President Magufuli is Pombe. But I have no doubt that President Magufuli will remain on the right course. As you say here in Tanzania, atabaki kwenye njia kuu hata chepua. To vote right. I remember in 2007 when I attempted to seek a parliamentary seat and I had a 10-point agenda with sera zangu. The people said, sisi hatutaki sera, tunataka karo. Then I told them subsequently that how is it, and I repeat it again here, you have been given an opportunity to elect. You elect a hyena to take care of goats, and then when the goats have been eaten, you wonder why. I'm submitting to us that one of the ways is having a new constitutional dispensation. The other thing that we must do beyond the institution, beyond the constitution, is to have institutions. You know, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, whom you now rightly refer to as Baba wa Taifa, said, you are not successful until your successor succeeds. Today, Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere is successful because his successors have succeeded. Did you not have Mzee Mwinyi? Did you not have Benjamin William Mkapa? Did you not have Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete? Did you not have John Pombe Magufuli, who have seen and said, we must protect the sitting presidents? In order to preserve the nation, sometimes memories must be selective. I remember after the civil war in Nigeria, the young Yakubu Gowon, receiving the Biafrans who had surrendered, said, brothers, I'm happy to see you. And the commentator says, at a critical point in Nigerian history, the victor did not gloat and the vanquished were not humiliated. What Pombe Magufuli is doing is right. There is no future without forgiveness. There is no future without selective memories, but we must never forget. I'm submitting to us that the only thing that survives and will introduce hygiene in African politics is institutions. Because institutions will exist beyond us. And I'm happy to say that in Tanzania, one begins to see institutions. One begins to see individuals who are smaller than institutions. Because if you are larger than institution, then you consume institution. And Mobutu Sese Seko reminded us that when he changed his name from Joseph Desire Mobutu to Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbendu Wanzambanga. And when he died, until today, the Democratic Republic of Congo is not at ease. Beyond the institution, the other thing that we must do is that we must have men and women of integrity. These men and women of integrity are not angels. They'll have made mistakes, but they'll have learned from those mistakes. These men and women should be subjected to certain ideals. That is why Mwalimu Nyerere once again said, lazima tuwe na siasa ya maadili na miko. There must be taboos in politics, the do's and the don'ts. Tukiwa na sera huria, basi ni uhuni utatamalaki. I'm submitting to us that we must have integrity in order to inject hygiene in Kenyan, in African politics. I'm submitting to us the fourth thing, that the other thing that we must do is that we must de-ethnicize our politics. And I'm saying, it doesn't mean that you reject your being a Sukuma or a Mhaya or a Luo or a Kamba. Celebrate all those. But remember that in order to produce melodious music, you play the white of the piano and the black of the piano, and lo and behold, there is symphony, and there is harmony, and there is joy. I'm submitting to us that in order to introduce hygiene in our politics, the quality of the lives of the people must be improved. The gross national happiness index must improve, not the gross domestic product. I'm submitting to us that the misery index must go down. In other words, young Tanzanians and young Africans must have the opportunity to realize their potential. They must not go out to be humiliated. You know, today, and if there is any Chinese in the assembly, forgive me, because the Chinese are an amazing people. 30 years ago, China was a third world country. Then they made a decision, and China will never be the same again. I want to submit to you, all of you who are in this assembly, 99% of the things that you have are from China. If it is your phone, even if it is iPhone, it is assembled in China. Everything we have is from China. China has become the factory of the world. They know what they want and they are going for it. I'm submitting to us that if we are to produce hygiene in African politics, we must know what we want. Nyerere used to say, wakati mwingine wa Afrika tunabaki tunashangaa na kuduatu. Wachina hawa. I'm submitting to us that China knows what it wants, and Africa must now ask herself, what does she want? for her women? What does she want for our young men and women? And I have no doubt that we have the wherewithal to find out what we want. I'm submitting to us that we must also introduce equality and inclusivity. Our women must be given their pride of place. And I must say, somebody said something with which I agreed terribly 2 days ago. Why must it be that when we are dealing with our women and our youth, we must create for them a microfinance? Why? For how long will our women be in micro enterprises? Why can't our women be involved in mega enterprises? I'm submitting to us that we must mainstream our women, because 52% of the population cannot be left in the periphery. And I'm saying that when you include everybody, when everybody is at the dinner table, then everybody will be happy, because the last time I checked, I used to think that there were 2 ways of being at the dinner table of civilization. And I used to say that at the dinner table of civilization, you can be present as a waiter or a diner. But 2 days ago, somebody told me, no, that you can also be the food to be eaten. So Africans, choose you now what role you want to play at the dinner table. Do you want to be the food to be eaten? Do you want to be the waiter to be waiting upon the diner? Or you want to be the diner? Africans have been food for too long. Africans have been waiters for too long. This is the time to be diners at the dinner table of democracy. I'm submitting to us that we are not children of a lesser God. I'm saying that there is a tide in the affairs of man which, taken on a crest, leads to great fortunes. But if you miss them, it leads to great miseries. Shakespeare was right. Chinua Achebe was right. If you want and you seek, you will never fail to find. Difficulties may and indeed will exist, but it's through overcoming them that we grow stronger. And I'm submitting to us that we have the ability to do that. And to the young Africans, Chinua Achebe posed the question, where are the young suckers that will grow when the old banana dies? Are you those young suckers that will grow when the old bananas who are seated here die? Because the future of Africa is in your hands. Young Chinese are coming here, teaching us how to read Mandarin. Are we teaching them Kiswahili? Young Chinese are coming here working 7 days a week. Are you working 7 days a week? You artists, kuku can vaa raizoni, but beyond varing raizoni, the kuku must land and liberate Africa. You young Africans, why are you going to Europe and America? You young Africans, why are you celebrating Manchester United, not younger? You young Africans, why don't you have Sunday Manara and Gibson Sembuli recreated rather than Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi? You young Africans, why are you celebrating Julio Iglesias? Why are you not celebrating Farida Karoli? Why are you not remembering Baraka Munshehe Mwaruka, solo in his national? I'm submitting to us that in order to have political hygiene, we must also have self-esteem. Kwa Kiswahili lazima tujiamini sisi. Self-esteem. Once we have self-esteem, that we know that we are equal and that God in his divine wisdom decided the God that I worship is a God of diversity. He looks at a white man and a white woman and he says, behold, the great creation. And he turns to the Arab, the brown Arab, and says, oh, what a good brown creation. And he turns to the slitty-eyed Chinese and the Japanese and he says, behold, what a great creation. And he turns to the Negroid and says, I perfected it here. What a perfect turn. So that when we sit at the dinner table of civilization, It is the diversity that we should look forward to. And I'm submitting to us that once we've done all that, then Africa will be great. Once we have done all that, Africa will be great, and Africa can be great. But Africa will not be great on the basis of pronouncements. I know that the Africans sat in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and came with Africa Agenda 2063. But Africa will not realize Agenda 2063 when 90% of African Union budget is externally financed. He who calls the piper calls the tune. That old English saying is still true. Because, as they say in French, plus ça change, plus la même chose. The more things change, the more they remain the same in Africa. But I'm submitting to us that this time round, they must not remain the same. So, fellow Africans, and individuals who may not be Africans but are from other civilizations and our sisters and brothers, make Africa great. This continent can be great. Make Africa's education great. Let Dar es Salaam University be great. Let Nairobi be great. Let Fura Bay in Sierra Leone be great. Let our education be great, and we will make it great. Let African agriculture be great. Let us feed ourselves. Let us have food and beef and chicken and grains made in Africa. Let African agriculture be great. Let African infrastructure be great. Let us have the new train moving from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to Dakar in Senegal, and from Cape Town to Cairo. Let there be great infrastructure. Let us have one passport so that when I arrive at Dar es Salaam, I'm not asked for my passport. Please, let us have one. Let us have one currency so that I don't have to fly for 1 hour and I confront Tanzanian shilling. I fly for 55 minutes, I confront the Rwandese franc. I confront the Angolan kwanza. Let us have a unit of currency which is uniform. You can call it the Afro, whichever name you prefer, but let us have one currency. I'm submitting to us that we can be great. Let us have our women occupy their pride of place. Let us make the Congo the Silicon Valley of Africa. Let us make Niger or Burkina Faso the head of nuclear power. Let us make Congo and the Kariba the production headquarters of electricity. Let there be light in Africa. Let there be light in Africa. And I'm submitting to us that that can be achieved if we introduce hygiene in African politics and African affairs. Let us have Africa Magulified. God bless you.
Naitwa Niki wa Pili, ni msanii wa rap. Mimi nataka kufanya tu tafakuri kulingana na aliyosema profesa. Na nataka ya maswali tu ya tafakari sisi, sio profesa. Cha kwanza, je, tulipelekwa ukoloni kwa sababu tulikuwa tuna low self esteem? Tulipelekwa ukoloni kwa sababu tulikuwa hatuna taasisi imara? Tulipelekwa ukoloni kwa sababu tulikuwa hatuna constitution? Nataka maswali mtafakari. Swali lingine ni kwamba ametoa historia ya viongozi wema na waovu. Je, swali ni swala la tabia ya mtu mwenyewe kuwa mlafi, kwamba kina Nyerere walikuwa na tabia nzuri na wakina Idi Amin kwa tabia mbovu, au ni swala la mfumo linamplace kiongozi kuplay role fulani ya ufisadi na mfumo wenyewe wa kifisadi? Swali lingine, tumesikia kina Nkuruma waliondolewa, kina Sankara, kina Lumumba. Kwa nini? Sio kwa sababu walikuwa wako serikalini wanakataa kula rushwa. Waliondolewa kwa sababu walikuwa wanataka kuvunja mfumo wa kinyonyaji wa uchumi. Tusipoteze hiyo point. Kwa hiyo ukombozi wetu ni kubadilisha kiongozi, tusubiri aje kiongozi mwema, au ni kubadilisha mfumo wenyewe mzima? Tunasema tutengeneze katiba. Katiba ni mchakato wa kirasimu, ni mchakato wa tabaka gani? Tabaka gani litahozi mazungumzo ya katiba na litawakilisha interest ya kina nani? Tunasema tutengeneze taasisi katika fikra zipi? Kwa sababu hiyo lugha ya taasisi inaongelewa na wakubwa World Bank wote wanaongea. Au taasisi katika lugha ya mwalimu ya kusema vijiji ndio vituo vya demokrasia, vituo vya maendeleo au vituo vya mamlaka. Je, tatizo ni rushwa au ni mfumo mzima? Kwa mfano mimi nagombea ubunge. Natafuta hela za kampeni kuwa mbunge. Chama kinagombea urais, natafuta hela za kampeni kuchukua madaraka. Hizo hela wanapata kwa nani? Wanapokuja kupata mamlaka, hiyo mikataba wanaenda kufanya kwa nani? Kwa hiyo kumbe huo mfumo wenyewe wa demokrasia ni tool, ni chombo cha kufanikisha huo mfumo mzima wa unyonyaji ufanye kazi. Kwa hiyo profesa ameongea vizuri sana, lakini kwangu mimi nasema ukombozi wa Afrika hautaletwa na Mesaya, Masi. Hata ukiwasoma kina Mwalimu, kina Kabrala, kina Sankara, waliogopa sana hiyo dhana ya umasi ambao sisi wote tunaiabudu. Leo tumejaa kwa sababu anakuja Profesa Lumumba. Ni dhana ya umasi. Hakuna wakulima hapa wamekuja kutoa mada. Hao ndio wanaishi umaskini kila siku. Hakuna wakonda, hakuna wapiga debe. Kuna hiyo hierarchy ya kuhodhi maarifa. Sisi wasomi ndio tutaongea. Wale wanyonge tumewaacha. Kwa hiyo kwangu mimi nataka kukazia kwamba mapinduzi pekee ambayo yataikomboa Afrika kwanza ni kuvunja huo mfumo mzima wa uchumi na kubadilisha mfumo kama Mwalimu alivyotaka kubadilisha mfumo. Turudishe nguvu kwa wananchi. Tukumbuke mapinduzi ya Afrika yalipigwa na wananchi, lakini viongozi walipokuja kuyashika na kukaa kwenye mikutano waliwalagai na kuwauza wananchi. Tunatengeneza taasisi, lakini Mwalimu alisema taasisi za kidemokrasia. Kwa sababu nzako ni taasisi lakini ni chombo cha ubepari. Kwa hiyo kwangu mimi naungana na profesa kwamba tumeona viongozi wachafu, lakini mfumo unawapa fursa za kuwa wachafu. Kwa hiyo lazima tuelewe mfumo mzima unafanyaje kazi na tools zake ni zipi. Mimi naogopa sana hizo lugha za taasisi, equality, kwa sababu wakoloni ni lugha zao hizo. Katiba na kila kitu. Kwa mimi narudi kwa sababu ilimfanya Sankara akawawa Hani wa South Africa, akawawa Lipumba kwa sababu walitaka kubadili mfumo wa kiuchumi. Na ni lazima uanze na dira kubwa kama Mwalimu alibadilisha elimu, alibadilisha siasa na kila kitu kutengeneza mfumo mpya. Kama ambavyo wazungu walivyotoka kwenye ukabaila kwenda kwenye ubepari, waliua mfumo mzima wa ubepari. Kwa hiyo kama tunataka turudi, lazima tuue mfumo mzima wa unyonyaji na tools zake zote. Tutengeneze mfumo mpya ndio tutaweza kutoka. Lakini hizo lugha za katiba na nini, hizo ni lugha za warasimu. Asante sana.
I'm Dr. Wale Okedino, a former member of the parliament from Nigeria. And I have two questions for you. When you are making your beautiful presentation, you condemned President Mugabe for staying too long. But you are partial to Museveni and Paul Kagame. Are you trying to tell us that we can allow a little extension of office for our leaders? Or how do we do this? Thank you.
Thank you. I am Dr. Camillus Kasala of the Eastern Africa Statistical Training Center. I have followed Professor Lumumba's presentation. I would like to submit to us that this, what I'm going to say, will be the summary of his presentation, very short. There is no hygiene in African politics because of what I call the not always vicious circle. This circle begins with what is logical in African politics is not always practical. What is practical is not always right. What is right is not always ethical. What is ethical is not always desired. And what is desired takes us back to what is not always logical. Now, what is the hygiene? Mwalimu Nyerere avoided what I call temptations of 5 Ps. And I would like the young people here to listen very, very carefully, because the world today is everywhere broadcasting these 5P temptations. Please, future African leaders, the young people, avoid the first P. Avoid being the victim of the first P. The first P is power. Avoid being the victim of the second P, property. Avoid being the victim of the third P, prestige. Avoid being the victim of the fourth P, popularity. And avoid being the victim of the last P, pomposity. Waswahili wanaita mbwe mbwe. Mziepuke hizo zote. Asante sana.
Thank you very much. I believe I can answer from here. Let me start with the last question that you posed. And as I grow older, I hold the view that my answers do not necessarily represent the truth. This is my view of the issues. Opposition in modern day Africa is very reasoned. If you look at the first leaders, the whole idea of building the nation they thought could best be articulated by having one-party state. They said, we are so fragile, we are so diverse, that we must have one political party. And there is a sense in which they were right. If you look at your typical European nation, and I want you to look at Europe from Sweden, there will invariably be nation states. If you go to Sweden, they are the Swedes with a small Lapp or Sami population. And you'll find they have a small parliament for them. If you go to Norway, you'll discover they are Norwegians, almost 99%. If you go to Finland, the bulk of them are the Finns with a small Swedish population. If you go to Denmark, they are the Danes. If you go to the Netherlands, they are the Dutch. If you go to Spain, where there are a multiplicity of ethnicities, then there are problems. You have a problem, you remember, during the reign of General Franco, of the Basque country, even up till now, the Catalans, the Galicians. So there is a sense in which Europe, in fact, I dare say, Africa handles diversity better than Europe does. If you go to the Baltics, you find the former Yugoslavia, which has produced several countries from Yugoslavia. You have the Slovenes, the Bosnians, the Herzegovina. There is a sense the Soviet Union collapsed before our very eyes. But Africa somehow, and this was once again, many of you will remember in 1963, the Addis Ababa conference, and 1964, the Cairo conference, what is normally referred to as the Nasserite Nyerere's Nkrumahist approach, that we should not redraw African boundaries because it would create conflict. And there was a sense, therefore, that if you came to many African countries, they say, let us have one-party states. And many of the party states, the states or the parties that took over power were revolutionary parties. They were freedom-fighting parties. If you came to Kenya, Kenya African National Union, in Tanzania, TANU and Afro-Shirazi, in South Africa, African National Congress, MPLA, Frelimo, ZANU, PF, and all these parties. And they took the view, let us have one party so that everybody is under the umbrella of that party to avoid ethnic division. And one may quarrel about that particular approach, but if you look at it, there was merit in it. Then, of course, Europe persuaded us. Europe is always in the business of persuading us that you cannot have democracy when there is only one party, and that therefore we have multi-party politics. And many African countries were dragged wailing and kicking to this dinner table of multi-partyism. Nyerere was one of the cleverer ones. He did it before everybody did it and said, let us admit it. And you had NCCR, Mageuzi, Chadema, and all those parties. But the net effect is that the African politician is a very conflicted individual. Because on the one hand, he has a culture and tradition defining how he behaves, but on the one hand, he also wants to behave as if he is a typical British or Dutch politician. So I say sometimes that when you look at an African politician, he suffers from split personality. And I say this in all seriousness. What the African politicians in many countries say on the platform is not what they believe in. And our own president, former President Daniel Moi, used to say it very well. After he had read the English speech, he would say, nimesema hayo nimesema, sasa wacha niseme. In other words, there are things that you say for the comfort and benefit